My wife's personal assistant was the one pulling all the strings, setting up her meetings, booking her flights, even arranging appointments with her divorce attorney. He thought I was clueless. Every time I called her office, he'd answer with that same polite tone, say Julia was in a meeting, and then leave me hanging on the line like I had nothing better to do. Meanwhile, she'd be sitting right there, espresso in hand, plotting with him how to cut me out of her life cleanly. No money, no mercy. The saddest part? Everyone knew. Her co-workers, her subordinates, the entire accounting team. They didn't say a word, but their eyes said it all. This cold, quiet look people give when they know something you don't. Like watching someone who doesn't realize they've become a side character in their own story. And me? I was the last to know. At least, that's what they thought. The day Julia signed the divorce papers, I sat across from her. I smiled, didn't ask why, didn't blame her. Why? Because in that exact moment, I knew, through all these months, the only person who was truly planning ahead was me. The first crack showed up one March morning. I'd woken up earlier than usual. The sky was still dark. I opened my laptop and started working right there in bed, with the bedside lamp casting a faint glow from the left. Julia was still asleep next to me, hair draped across her back, breathing steady. Sleeping deep, like someone without a single worry in the world. At exactly 5:47 a.m., her phone buzzed, soft, barely audible, but loud enough to trigger something in my gut. I didn't plan to reach for it, but instinct beat thought. I picked it up. The screen lit up just enough for me to read the new message. Can't wait any longer. See you today, beautiful. I stared at those words. I didn't close the screen. I just let the glow wash over my face, like the truth itself had decided to show its hand in silence. We'd been living together for 23 years, and in all that time, I'd never once snooped through her phone. Not because I trusted her blindly, just because I'd never thought I needed to. Trust, for me, was a habit, like brewing coffee every morning, or pulling the curtains before bed. It didn't need proving. It just needed repeating. At exactly 6 a.m., her alarm went off like always. Julia stirred, stretched, voice still caught in sleep. She said, "Morning, love," in that same soft, familiar tone, so familiar I almost forgot what I'd just read. She reached for her phone. One swipe. Smooth. No hesitation. The message vanished. "Sleep well?" she asked, not fully turning, but just enough for me to catch her half smile. I said, "Like a rock." Not because I meant to joke, but because I was watching. She smiled back, the same smile that once made me fall for her in college. But now it felt too polished, like it had been practiced, rehearsed in a mirror. It wasn't my Julia anymore. It was a version of her, scripted, adjusted, and programmed to deliver the right expression at the right time. That was the first morning I realized I wasn't living with a wife anymore. I was inside a performance, and my role was the clueless one. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own story, like the whole world was moving around you while you stood still, leave a like, so I know I'm not the only one who's been there. After that morning, I started noticing more. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not notice anymore. Julia had been coming home late a lot. Same excuses every time. Last-minute meetings, deadlines pushed up, new teams still figuring things out. Every time she said it, I nodded. I didn't press. I just checked the clock. Dinner started going cold, literally. I'd cook, set the table, and sit waiting. Some nights she came home close to 10. Other times she got back earlier, but said she'd already eaten. Her phone never left her hand. Even while doing the dishes, she kept it right next to the sink, screen face down. She started wearing a different perfume. Something woodsy, cold, distant. Gone was the soft vanilla I used to wake up to every morning. The first time I noticed was a morning she left early. I stayed in bed, and the new scent lingered on her pillow. It felt foreign, like I'd woken up in someone else's bed. One Sunday morning, I was cleaning up the home office. In the small trash bin under her desk, I found 2 crumpled pieces of paper, One was a receipt from an Italian restaurant, the one we used to dream of going to for our 25th anniversary. The other was a hotel invoice. Same day, double room. Signed, Julia. I remember that day vividly. I'd gotten up early and made her favorite, Italian-style lasagna. Took me nearly 2 hours. Not because it was a special occasion, just because I wanted to hold on to something familiar. Around 11, she came downstairs, dressed sharp, long dress, light makeup. She said she was meeting a girlfriend. I nodded. Didn't ask which friend. Didn't ask where. She came home near 10 p.m. that night. That strange perfume clung to her blouse. I noticed. I said nothing. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel hurt. It was more like flipping on a light in the middle of the night, and finally seeing the thing that had been lurking in the dark all along. The company's Christmas party was the final nail in the coffin of all the doubts I'd tried to pretend weren't solid enough. Julia was surprised when I told her I wouldn't be going with her like every other year. I wanted to see her reaction, and she gave me exactly what I expected. Just a nod. Then she turned back to the mirror to adjust her dress. She came down the stairs in a black V-neck gown, cold red lipstick, perfume thick on her wrists, heels I'd once seen in her online shopping cart, the ones she said were ridiculously overpriced. An hour later, I changed into a dress shirt and drove to the hotel where the party was held. I didn't call, didn't text. I didn't need words. I needed to see. The ballroom was crowded. I stood by the bar, scanning. My eyes landed on her, Julia, tucked into a corner table, leaning in toward Lucas, fingertips circling the rim of her wine glass. Lucas whispered something and brushed her cheek. No shame, no secrecy. Just the kind of ease people have when they know they've gotten away with it. But what floored me wasn't the touch. It was his watch. Black steel face, dark leather band. I'd tried it on once at the mall. Julia had been with me. She smiled softly as I admired it. I said it suited me. She glanced at the price, nearly $3,000, and shook her head. "It's not necessary," she said. I nodded. Put it back. Took one last look before we walked away. And now, it was on the wrist of the man whispering to my wife. I walked out of that ballroom. No one noticed. No one stopped me. But I could feel it. Eyes at my back. Like they'd been expecting me not to be part of this night all along. I sat in my car. Not angry. Not hollow. Just humiliated. Not because she cheated, but because everyone knew. Except me. I thought I was grown enough not to care about pride. Turns out, being the punchline is what really chokes you up. I was just a background character in a script everyone else had already memorized. Everyone but me. But if they thought I'd let that be the ending, they were dead wrong. That night, I started planning. Quietly, but step by step. As precise as the way they'd been doing it to me. One night in February, Julia said she was tired, wanted to take a long bath to unwind. She headed into the bathroom. I gathered up our cups and walked to the kitchen. Passing through the living room, I noticed her phone on the couch. The screen lit up. Incoming call. Lucas. It was 10:47 p.m. I sat down, opened my laptop, hit record, placed it near the phone. Then I went back to the bedroom like nothing had happened. A while later, Julia came out of the bathroom. She walked downstairs, saw the missed call, then called up to me saying she had an urgent meeting with her team, told me to go ahead and sleep. I stayed still, pretended to drift off. She went back downstairs. My laptop kept recording. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed. Julia was sound asleep, facing away from me. I saw her phone on the nightstand. She'd sent a few messages before powering it off. I went downstairs, opened the laptop, plugged in my headphones, hit play. Her voice came through, clear, calm. She was telling Lucas about the divorce plans, said she was confident I'd sign without a fight, that her lawyer would handle the rest. Assets, shares, the house. It was all sorted. Lucas sounded hesitant, but Julia reassured him, said they wouldn't have to hide anymore. They could go public. She even mentioned selling the house, said it held too many memories, and she wanted a clean slate. I paused the audio, closed the laptop. I didn't need anything else. I had enough. Enough to launch a counterattack and end this performance for good. If you're wondering what happened next, drop a comment. Who knows? Your guess might be closer to the truth than you think. I didn't confront Julia. I didn't break things. I didn't show up at Lucas's door. I just started preparing. She thought I was weak. She thought I was blind. She was wrong. I began with a name Julia would never expect. Emily. It came to me on a random Tuesday morning, sitting at a coffee shop near Julia's office. Emily used to be one of her closest friends. Not many people knew that. Julia had a habit of erasing old ties once they were no longer useful. But I remembered. I'd met Emily a few times at work events. Quiet, sharp, always a step behind Julia, but often the one who saw things more clearly. I didn't follow Julia. I followed Emily. I looked into her schedule. She still worked at the same company, just in a different department now. No longer directly under Julia, but high enough up to know what was really going on. After 3 days, I learned she had a routine. After work, she'd stop by a small cafe. Black coffee, no sugar. Always sat by the window. I showed up. Sat 2 tables away. Said nothing. Just waited. The second time I saw her, I made my move. Walked up, nodded, told her my name. She looked at me for a moment. Not suspicious, not exactly warm either. Just calculating. I didn't press. I simply said I needed to understand a few things about Julia. That something didn't feel right, and I wanted to know what was really going on. She didn't look surprised. She told me a few things. That Julia had gotten unusually close to her young assistant, the one who always had system access before even the accounting team did. He was constantly around Julia, like an extension of her. There were rumors, but no one said anything. Julia had climbed high enough that silence became self-preservation. Then Emily mentioned an old project, how Julia had pushed her out at the last second to take credit for a key presentation. That move got Julia promoted. Emily got reassigned. She didn't complain. She was talented enough to stand on her own. But from that day on, there was silence between them. Then she looked at me straight and asked, "What do you want from me?" I answered slowly. "No games." I told her I was looking for things Julia wouldn't want anyone to know she was doing. Emily gave a small nod. No promises. But her eyes told me enough. That was the start. The quiet shifting of something beneath the surface. Something that was no longer entirely in Julia's control. I didn't reach out again. I didn't need to. 4 days later, Emily sent me a single message. Monday, 8 p.m. Same place. I went to the cafe where we first spoke. Light rain tapped against the windows. Emily was already there, black coffee in front of her, same seat by the window. She didn't greet me, didn't ask how I'd been. She slid a thin folder onto the table, clipped neatly with a silver fastener. No labels, no markings. Inside were internal copies of suspicious expense reports. Each charge fell within Julia's discretionary spending authority. None were large, but they were regular, every few weeks, always marked under vague labels like event partner or logistics costs. And yet no one in any relevant department had ever heard of these so-called partners. One payment went to a company with an unfamiliar name. A closer look revealed its business address matched her assistant's home. Emily gave me more context. A few people in finance had raised concerns, but every time the inquiries were shut down with vague messages from above. Julia was favored. She had direct ties to regional leadership. No one wanted to touch it. She told me this was just the surface. The company's internal system had a middle tier, a shadow layer where low-level approvals didn't trigger automatic audits. Only someone at Julia's level or higher could access it. I asked her if she was willing to go deeper. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. Not for me. Not to get revenge on Julia, but because she had once been quietly pushed out of her position while everyone stayed silent. And now, watching someone else get erased just as smoothly and surgically. She knew it was time to do something. She didn't ask for anything, didn't demand anonymity, didn't even ask what I planned to do next. We didn't make a deal. There were no whispered alliances, just a shared silence. And from that moment on, I knew Julia wasn't the only one pulling strings behind my back anymore. I started a private folder on my computer. No password, no encryption, just labeled it Old Tax Documents. Julia had never been one to check file storage, so I knew she wouldn't notice. Every time Emily sent over a new copy, detailed statements, suspicious approvals, proposal forms bearing Julia's signature, I filed them away. Neatly, methodically. I didn't rush. Instead, I began reviewing all of our household financial records, the ones I'd always assumed Julia was managing. Retirement accounts, stock portfolios, joint property investments, or investments in her name but paid for with shared funds. There was one thing I hadn't expected. She owned a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. I had no idea she'd purchased it, but the deposit and transaction fees had come out of a joint account I'd given her access to 3 years ago. I asked the bank to pull the full transaction history. It wasn't exactly easy. I started building a list. Joint assets quietly reassigned, hidden secondary accounts under Julia's name, transactions tied to her assistant, anonymous investments tied to shared funds, internal company contracts showing signs of falsified expense routing. Each item was numbered. Every piece of evidence had a citation. It wasn't far off from building a commercial litigation file. Only difference was, the person on the other side used to lie next to me every night for 23 years. And once I had enough, I started looking for a lawyer. Not someone local. I went further. Compiled a list of attorneys known for winning messy divorces, especially the ones involving equity disputes and financial misconduct. I chose one who had once stripped a banking executive of 70% of his assets for hiding private investment funds behind his wife's back. We met in a quiet conference room. I didn't say much, just handed him the folder. He read it, slowly, carefully. Then he looked up and nodded. Friday night. Julia came home earlier than usual. She cooked. French-style grilled meat, my favorite dish, though it had practically disappeared from our kitchen for years. She poured red wine, the kind we used to drink back when we were young and broke, on rainy nights in an apartment lit by one yellow bulb and a sofa we still owed 3 payments on. She told me a few stories about work, smiled softly, so softly that if I didn't already know the truth, I might have thought things were getting better. Dinner ended in silence. No music, no phones, just quiet. She brushed my hand gently as she stood up to wash the glasses, like she was touching a memory, like there hadn't been this massive void between us for months. I knew it was the warm-up, and sure enough, she came back with a stack of papers, set them down on the table, right where her dinner plate had just been. She didn't say anything at first, just sat, looked at me. Then she said it was a civilized step, that this relationship had reached its natural end. No tears, no pain. Just a clean break. If I agreed, all I had to do was sign. She'd handle the rest. I didn't ask much. I just picked up the pen she handed me, then set it back down. Why now? I asked. I mean, after all these years, what exactly have I done, or not done, that made you want to walk away? She didn't answer right away, tilted her head slightly, as if she was choosing her words carefully, whether to avoid hurting me, or just to sound like she cared. She started with the usual lines. We've grown apart. We're heading in different directions. Then she said something about life being made up of phases, and how people sometimes drift beyond the point of reconnecting. I nodded, played the part of the abandoned husband, trying to make sense of it all. She went on to say I hadn't done anything wrong, that I was kind, responsible, steady, but that it was that very steadiness that made her feel lost. That sometimes she just wanted to live for herself, make impulsive, reckless choices, without feeling guilty every time she saw me quietly existing beside her. I listened, said nothing, just watched her. She admitted she'd spent years trying to feel something again, whatever it was we used to have, but the more she tried, the more she realized it was gone, and that it wasn't anyone's fault, just time. I asked quietly, so, it's not because of someone else? She hesitated, briefly, then smiled. That half-genuine, half-rehearsed smile I'd seen too many times before. She said no, that she just needed freedom, and all she hoped for was that I'd understand and let her go peacefully. I sat still for a while, then nodded. I told her I wouldn't try to keep someone who no longer wanted to stay, that I knew I wasn't perfect, and if this was what helped her feel true to herself, I wouldn't stand in her way. She exhaled, visibly relieved. Her face softened, like she'd just finished a presentation she'd been rehearsing for weeks. I stood up, poured more wine, handed her the second glass, clinked it lightly and said, "Thanks for being honest." She clinked back, eyes a little misty, whether from real emotion or from believing she'd pulled off the cleanest victory, I couldn't tell. Then she got up and said I could take my time reading and signing. Went upstairs, calm, like she'd just checked off a bureaucratic errand, but I didn't sign. Not that night. The next morning, I brought the folder to my lawyer. He went through every page. No expression. Just scanned each line with the calm of someone who'd seen it all, until he paused at a familiar legal sleight of hand. All savings and investments accumulated during the marriage shall be fully administered by Party A after the date of signing. He looked up and said flatly, "She's been well advised. That phrasing is crafted to avoid asset valuation. If you sign it as is, contesting it later will be costly, time-consuming, and nearly impossible unless you have overwhelming evidence." I looked at him and asked, "Is there a way to sign without really signing?" He went quiet, then nodded. "If your signature deviates slightly from your registered ones, bank forms, tax records, previous contracts, not forged, just inconsistent, it introduces enough doubt. Legal gray. It won't void the agreement outright, but it creates the opening we need if you ever have to challenge it." I nodded. No hesitation. I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night, I signed. It wasn't a forgery, but it was missing the final loop in the D. The top of the L curved just a little differently. Subtle enough no one else would notice, except me and my lawyer. It was enough. Julia took the signed copy, smiled faintly. No questions, no hug, no touch. Just picked up the papers and walked upstairs. She thought she'd won. That very afternoon, she filed the petition, came home early, hung up her coat neatly in the closet. There was a relaxed glow on her face as she walked into the kitchen and saw me making coffee, like I was just a temporary guest, quietly preparing to fade out of her life. Later that night, while I was rinsing glasses at the sink, she sat in the living room and made a call. She didn't hide, didn't whisper. She didn't need to. I already knew how this act ended. She called Lucas. Her voice floated through the room, soft and heady, like wine with too much warmth. She told him I'd agreed, that everything was on track. Lucas laughed, a sharp, high laugh filled with relief. They talked about moving in together. She told him to start packing, that this house would be theirs soon. "Daniel will be gone in a few weeks. You don't have to hide anything anymore." I didn't flinch, just kept washing the glass, dried my hands, walked past her without a word. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me, as if I'd already vanished. But I knew something she didn't. Now the real game had begun, and this time I made the rules. That morning's hearing took place in a quiet courtroom on the 4th floor, a place more discreet than it was imposing. No gavel, no jury, just a judge, 2 attorneys, and a handful of documents already sorted and stacked. Julia arrived first with her lawyer. She didn't look at me when I walked in, just kept her head down, sitting upright, like everything was already wrapped up and ready to be finalized. I took my seat next to my attorney, Mr. Grant, a soft-spoken man with salt and pepper hair and a voice steady enough to have been designed specifically for high-stakes asset disputes. For the past 2 months, he'd worked with me line by line, peeling back every word Julia thought was cleverly written enough to slip past the law. The judge opened the session. Julia's side went first. Her lawyer laid out the property proposal. The house, the car, the investment accounts, most of the retirement fund. All of it configured so that, post-divorce, almost everything would be in Julia's name. I didn't argue, didn't say a word, just listened. Then it was our turn. Mr. Grant stood, calm as ever, handed over a file. He began with a financial counterclaim. Bank records from an online account opened under Julia's name nearly 2 years ago, completely omitted from the asset disclosures. Routine transfers from our joint account, funneled through to a crypto wallet she failed to report. Evidence that Julia hired someone to help draft overly complex, intentionally vague legal phrasing to obscure clear financial bias in the proposed settlement. Then came the matter of the divorce signature. A forensic analysis showing the signature on the divorce filing did not match my registered signatures with the bank, tax authorities, or legal contracts. In legal terms, I had never properly consented. The filing was invalid. The room shifted, but Mr. Grant wasn't done. He moved on to a formal whistleblower statement from Emily, Julia's former colleague, now a witness. Julia had authorized multiple expenses without passing through the auditing system. Several side contracts had been processed improperly, with Lucas, her personal assistant, receiving unexplained stipends. Company funds were used to pay for hotel bills, luxury shopping, and a business trip that never actually happened. Emily had filed an internal ethics complaint, triggering a formal investigation by Julia's company. Today's hearing was about the divorce, but the fallout would extend well beyond this courtroom. Julia and Lucas now faced potential financial fraud charges in a separate corporate proceeding. I didn't look at Julia, but I saw her hands tighten, her jaw stiffen. Her lawyer whispered something and began flipping through papers. They never thought someone had been collecting this much, and they definitely didn't expect it to be presented so precisely. I remained silent, just nodded once as Mr. Grant concluded, "My client agrees to the divorce, but not to being manipulated under the guise of trust. We request a continuance to allow full review of the new evidence." The judge nodded. Motion granted. The ruling was postponed. A new hearing would be scheduled after the DA's office reviewed all documents. The divorce would proceed, but this time by the book, by the law. As for Julia and Lucas, the two who once thought they'd walk away from this marriage as victors, they now found themselves surrounded on two fronts. One, from the company they believed they had in their pocket, and two, from the husband they assumed would quietly sign and disappear. I walked out of court alone. No goodbyes. Julia didn't call after me. Lucas wasn't there, probably too busy explaining himself to the audit committee. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't proud. I just thought one thing. The truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs someone patient enough to bring it back to the surface. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a missed call from an unknown number. No voicemail, no follow-up text, but I knew exactly who it was. That night, I got home late. It had started to rain. The wind was sharp, and the branches tapped softly against the window, just enough sound to stir up old memories. I made coffee. Not because I usually do at night, but because sometimes all I need is a familiar smell to remind myself that yes, I'm living alone now, in every sense of the word. At 8:27 p.m., the doorbell rang. One short chime. Crisp, not urgent, not hesitant. I opened the door. Julia was standing there, rain clinging to her hair. No raincoat, just a thin jacket and a cheap umbrella. Her eyes were red, but not swollen. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, not someone who'd just been crying. I didn't invite her in, and she didn't try to come in. She just stood there. For a while. I asked gently, "Did you need something?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved slowly across the porch, like she was searching for something that used to be there. Then she spoke, softly, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." I didn't react, didn't nod, didn't shake my head. She kept talking. Without waiting for permission, she said she knew she'd miscalculated. Not the plan, the person. She thought I didn't know. She thought I'd stay quiet, maybe just nod and accept things like I always had. But what hurt her most, what haunted her, was sitting in that courtroom, watching me say nothing, while the truth unfolded, layer by layer, calmly, precisely, without anger, without blame. "I thought I'd won," she said, "but in the end, I realized I never understood you at all." I looked at her, really looked. For the first time in months, I saw Julia, not through suspicion, not through hurt, just as a stranger now, someone I used to know, someone who still remembered my name, but nothing else about the person I'd become. She told me Lucas was gone, that the company had officially terminated her contract. She wasn't planning to fight it. She didn't have the energy, didn't see the point. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said, eyes fixed on the wet tiles beneath her feet. "I just want you to know. I get it now, all of it." I didn't say a word. I just opened the door a little wider and handed her the larger umbrella hanging inside. She looked up, slightly surprised. "Go home," I said. "It's still raining. No need to get wetter than you already are." She took the umbrella, said nothing, then turned and walked away. I stood by the window and watched, not because I still loved her, not because I wanted her back, but because I needed to see her walk away, on her own feet, without anyone beside her. No one holding her up, no one to blame, just a woman learning how to walk through the ruins she made with her own hands. 3 days later, I got an email from my lawyer. Julia had withdrawn the divorce petition, citing a need to reevaluate the financial settlement, a polite way of saying they didn't expect my counterclaim to be strong enough to collapse their entire plan. But the internal investigation at her company didn't stop. Emily kept sending documents. Both Lucas and Julia were suspended pending inquiry. This time, there were no friendly calendar invites, just formal summons from the corporate legal board, the kind of paperwork you can't erase with a quick meeting or a pre-written apology. I didn't show up in court anymore. My attorney handled the rest. They formally requested Julia disclose her full financial records for the past 5 years. I didn't need to check in. I already knew where it was going. A week later, Lucas moved out of his rented apartment. According to the doorman, he left at 2 a.m., carrying only 2 duffel bags and a small wooden box. I don't know if Julia helped him pack. I'm not even sure where she is now. But I do know one thing. The house we once shared is now fully under my name, after her side was forced to concede during the asset renegotiation. They thought I'd fold. They never expected I'd fight them with the very thing they tried to use against me: paperwork. On a quiet Saturday morning, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. The sun was soft. The neighbor's cat hopped onto the windowsill and lay still, blinking slowly like it had all the time in the world. I opened my laptop, skimmed through emails. One unread message caught my eye. The subject line was just her name. Inside, a single sentence: "If you still want to talk, I'm open." I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself another cup of coffee, plugged in my headphones, and played that old voice recording, the original copy I'd never submitted in court. Not out of spite, just as a reminder. A reminder of the moment when the person I trusted most said another man's name with a voice soft enough to tear something inside me. I don't hate Julia. I just refuse to become that same version of myself again. From the start, I never needed to win. I just needed to know who was real, who wasn't, who stood beside me for the right reasons, and who would disappear the moment life stopped being convenient. That fall, I updated every account, signed new legal papers. I didn't move out. I left everything where it was, like a living archive. But inside, I'd already moved on, and for the ones who once thought I was the fool, they don't need my revenge. They handled that themselves. Through their greed, their arrogance, and the illusion of perfection, they couldn't keep up forever. This story may not be yours, but if you see even a sliver of yourself in it, hit subscribe, because next time you might be the one finally speaking up.